My name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and I wanted to continue the story about metabolic flexibility. Today we're going to talk about what happens when we're trying to maintain this balance between glucose in the blood being poured out because of too much glucose in the diet, too much foods in the diet, too much proteins in the diet, too consistent eating. Even if you're eliminating gluten and you're still eating grains and you're going gluten-free, you're still getting too much glucose in the diet, and you've never tried to control your insulin. As a result, that output increases, that turnover rate increases, the pouring glucose into the bloodstream increases, even though glucose being accelerated out of the bloodstream increases, until it kind of goes haywire. And when it goes haywire, which it already had been at that point, when it goes haywire, what happens is insulin starts going down, but you haven't commensurated your eating, and as a result, insulin's kind of going up and down and it's sputtering and it can't do its job. We're not even talking about people who take insulin. So when insulin goes down, what happens? You're pouring more glucose into the body. You're breaking down your protein. If you're not eating enough healthy fats, you're not even able to have that ketosis get in there to stave off the breakdown of your proteins. And then what happens in that case is you're not metabolically flexible. Insulin keeps going down, and your stress response, infections, stress, toxins, chemical exposures, all of those things keep pouring glucose into the bloodstream. Your sweets keeps pouring glucose into the bloodstream. Your urges, your neurotransmitters, your dopamine, your adrenaline keeps pouring glucose into the bloodstream, and your glucose levels keep rising. And so we're trying to fix that. But one of the things I wanted to tell you was electrolytes. How many of you, put your hands up, have been told, oh, your fasting sodium is low, or your potassium's really low, or your potassium's really high, or your sodium's really high? It's not because you're eating too much or too little sodium or potassium. It's because this thing is going on. Your metabolic mayhem is going on. So I'm really excited to share with you this particular slide or this particular video. So you become dehydrated. You're always dehydrated no matter what happens. I'm thirsty. It doesn't matter. I'm always thirsty. I'm always peeing. Yeah, no bump. You know what happens is ultimately you're trying to balance. So you have this feedback loop, which we talked about. And the feedback loop is trying to maintain a steady state of glucose in the bloodstream. And it would love to go low. It'd love to keep it low. But when you're constantly pouring out glucose from foods and you're eating consistently, even if they're healthy foods, even if they're gluten-free foods, even if it's protein, but then eventually insulin goes down and you're pouring even more glucose from your stored protein. So what happens is you've got to get rid of it somehow, and the way you do it is you pee it out. And that's called osmotic diuresis. It's basically a built-in protective mechanism to lower that glucose from peeing. And then ultimately what happens is you may replace it with a sugary glucose drink, and that causes even more mayhem. Or you may be good and you may say, okay, I'm just going to drink water, and you do water, and that's great. And it may be able to keep up with the rate at which you're excreting the water, but you're still dehydrated. Why is that? Because it's not keeping up with the replenishment of sodium that you're losing. And that's a real big problem. So you first start losing sodium, and then you start losing potassium. And then what happens is it upregulates your angiotensin and renin sort of thing, and it brings up your aldosterone. And so that's a good thing. What happens is you increase your sodium. It retains more sodium, and then it loses a lot of potassium. And you'll be like, oh my goodness, that's me. I'm the guy that loses all the potassium. And then I say to you, okay, well, stop eating so often. And you say, well, if I don't eat, I'm going to faint, I'm going to crash. Well, you're just keeping that perpetuation of that metabolic mayhem going. That's what you're doing. But anyways, so what happens here is you deplete your sodium, and then eventually you deplete your potassium, and then eventually you upregulate your retention of sodium, and then that's what causes a lot of this mayhem. But the thing is that you're drinking lots of coffee, and you're not drinking enough water for the day even to match the amount that you're losing. And I've always said half your body weight plus or minus, if you weigh 200 pounds, then you should be drinking 100 ounces of water. But then if you drink another cup of coffee, you got to up that 32 ounces. But you got to make sure you have your electrolytes in there, because if you don't, your pH is going to go down, and those electrolytes are very important for metabolic activity like Krebs cycle. And we're not even talking about genetic SNPs. A lot of people have that genetic SNP where that renin-angiotensin SNP factor is there, and they're not able to do this very well, and that creates even more mayhem. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Dr. Rosen, you're making so much sense. What am I going to do? Pay attention, I'll tell you on the next video.